Katie Ratcliffe was an 18-year-old apprentice hairdresser living in Camberley, Surrey. She was described as trusting and a happy girl. The young and bright girl dreamt of one day opening her own hair salon. Life was good for Katie. Katie had just gotten into her first serious relationship and thought he was the one, until he unexpectedly broke up with her. This content is unsuitable for children and maybe some adults as well. The story has a lot of dark twists and turns. On June 6, 1992, Katie was out with a few friends who had rallied around her hoping drinks would get her mind off her now and sadly ex-boyfriend, who she thought she would spend forever with. She was enjoying her time at the nightclub with her friends, drinking and dancing. However, the enjoyment didn't last long as Katie's ex was at the bar. She decided to pour her heart out to him, but was ultimately rejected. He had been there with a new date. As the night came to an end, Katie parted ways with her friends. She was distressed and heartbroken. Sadly, Katie would never make it home. Her body was found in the streets of Farnborough, a nearby town 3 miles away from the nightclub. She was attacked and stabbed 32 times with a 6.5-inch knife, some of the stab wounds going right through her body. Her ribs and heart were punctured and her genitals were mutilated. The body had been dragged along a road and dumped by a cemetery wall. With the severity of the case and apparent sexual motive, or so it seemed, police believed the culprit was a male. The first thing investigators did was focus on people who were at the nightclub the same night as Katie, but unfortunately, there were no leads. The case went cold for years. Remarkably, the suspect could have gotten away with the murder if they had kept their mouth shut. Sharon Louise Carr was born on December 21, 1981 in Belize. She was raised by her mother and stepfather. She had 3 siblings. The 4 children had 3 different fathers, and Sharon didn't know who her biological father was. Sharon's childhood wasn't easy. She had lived in poverty and her parents were aggressive. Sharon's father was a heavy drinker and was very abusive towards her mother. In turn, her mother would abuse her children and vent all her anger out on them. Sharon's mother met her then stepfather George Carr in the early 1980s. George was a Jamaican soldier who was in the British Army, but he was stationed in Belize at the time. They fell in love and got married, and in 1986 they decided to move to England. The family settled down in Camberley and Sharon started school there. Sharon was a pleasant girl at school. One of her teachers even described her as obliging and kind. But no one knew that this seemingly kind, sweet, normal young girl would become Britain's youngest female killer. Sharon's behavior slowly changed. She started hanging out in the wrong crowd and hanging out with people who were considered a bad influence. She had even started smoking weed at just the age of 11. Oddly, Sharon's only friends were older boys. Sharon didn't get along with girls. And although there's nothing wrong with her hanging out with boys, Sharon was quite aggressive. These so-called friends of hers had her stealing and buying and even selling drugs. And things just became a little bit more twisted when Sharon started to pick up an interest in weapons and carried a knife in her school bag. Sharon's life outside of school was even more complicated, scary to say the least. Sharon's mother had just done something so disturbing. When her husband approached her asking for a divorce, she became so enraged. She poured hot, boiling oil over his head. They were both hospitalized for serious burns, and her mother later charged with assault. But what may be unsettling is, Sharon wasn't fazed by this at all. She actually witnessed the whole incident, but told police her mother didn't do anything. It makes you wonder if her childhood experiences shaped who she had become. I'll leave that up to you to think about. Following the incident, her mother was ordered to receive mental health therapy for 3 years. Mentally, it seems Sharon wasn't all that there. While her mother was away, Sharon started practicing voodoo, introduced by her mother, who taught Sharon rituals that require sacrificing animals, and so sacrificing animals is what Sharon did. As you may know, children often start out by killing animals before they move on to humans. Acts of cruelty to animals are symptomatic of a deep mental disturbance. Research in psychology and criminology shows that people who commit acts of cruelty to animals do not stop there. Many of them move on to their fellow humans. As a way to gain control, Sharon started praying, and not for good things. Her prayers were to harm people. However, by secondary school, Sharon's behavior had changed, and for the better. Sharon's mother was home, and she had just met a new man whom she married. Sharon's good behavior didn't last long. She soon began to act out in class, and this seemingly pleasant child was disruptive in school and became a class clown. She made sure all the focus was on her. On June 7, 1994, the exact date when Katie was murdered, Sharon attacked her classmate, Anne Marie Clifford, 13, with a 4-inch knife in the school washroom. It was a random attack with no cause. According to witnesses, Sharon was happy as she carried out the attack and enjoyed watching the girl gasp for air. Sadly, Anne Marie had a punctured lung and as a result almost died. Sharon was immediately arrested and charged with murder. When questioned, police were taken back by how cold and matter-of-fact she was, and thus she was taken to an assessment center for psychological evaluation. During the process, Sharon tried to strangle 2 staff members. It was clear she was mentally unstable, and because of her erratic behavior, Sharon's charges were increased, adding 2 charges of bodily harm. Sharon was eventually found guilty of these attacks and the attempted murder of Anne Marie. She was sentenced to 2 years of arbitrary detention. However, she wasn't deemed stable enough to be housed with other criminals. She repeatedly attacked girls and showed no signs of stopping. So, an unusual decision was made to send Sharon with boys at another location. And surprisingly, this move worked for her. Sometime in September 1995, when Sharon was in her mid-teens, she was transferred to Bullwood Hall Young Offenders Institution. The staff members believed they could better control her aggressive and sexualized behavior there. The staff, as well as the girls, were uncompromising. This worked better for Sharon. Staff kept their eyes and ears on her. They grew suspicious of everything she did, but Sharon clearly did not care. Sharon started discussing Katie Ratcliffe's murder over the phone with her loved ones. She also wrote about it in her diaries. You can pause and read if you'd like. There are some entries that I refuse to put up on here because, well, they're disturbing. Later on, Sharon developed a crush on a prison officer and started talking with him about what she had done to Katie. The officer alerted the police. The police seized Sharon's writing and drawings. Detectives questioned her for 27 hours, and Sharon gave 3 different statements. The central theme in all the statements was that she had repeatedly stabbed Katie Ratcliffe. The following is an entry from Sharon's diary. I must warn you again, the details are disturbing. In 1996, Sharon was charged with the murder of Katie Ratcliffe. After a long trial that lasted a full year, she was convicted of murder. Sharon officially became Britain's youngest ever female murderer. She smiled as she was being taken away. Following her trial, she was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 14 years. It was almost like Sharon was in another universe. I can still remember how frigid she was when we spoke. The majority of the persons you interview express some emotions over their actions. With her, however, emotions and logic were totally absent. Detective Sergeant Paul Clement's statement to the media. In 2023, 30 years after the murder, the parole board denied Sharon's freedom. She is now aged in her 40s, but is still deemed too dangerous to be released. The judge said she disclosed thoughts of wanting to murder another resident by splitting her head open with a flask and throwing her down the stairs to snap her neck. Sharon Carr's case is particularly unusual, not only due to her young age at the time of the crime. A 12-year-old girl killing an adult woman who she had never met before. Evil disguised as a 12-year-old girl. So what do you think? Was Sharon born evil, or did a violent childhood turn her into a cold-blooded killer? Thank you so much for joining me, and I really appreciate the support. If you want to continue supporting my channel, please subscribe, and see you next time. Take care and stay safe.